Please do keep an eye out for the portion of current affairs as well. Okay. Now, here, when we talk about these conservation measures, first of all, the entire concept of protection of or the protected areas was first initiated by the National Policy for Wildlife Conservation. That national policy for wildlife conservation, just a moment. So, that policy of wildlife conservation talked about the importance of saving the wildlife ecosystem, importance of saving the wildlife and the critical biodiversity around us also. Now, as I told you, in 1972, we basically had the Stockholm Conference. That Stockholm Conference talked about the three threats. Now, immediately after that, obviously, India was also a participant. 113 other countries were participants of the Stockholm Conference. Immediately after that, countries, they started formulating their own laws, their own regulations, which could encourage the process of conservation. So after that Stockholm conference, immediately after that, India passed one of the first most comprehensive legislations to ensure the conservation of biodiversity, to ensure that the biodiversity is not lost, and that is the Wildlife Act of 1972 was passed. It has been amended quite recently. Last year, it has basically gone through an amendment. We'll take a look at that amendment also. Not much major amendments have happened, but few minor amendments have taken place. Now, when we talk about the entire principle of conservation, the principle of conservation can be classified into two methods: in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. So, when we talk about in situ conservation, what is in situ conservation? In situ conservation, wherever the species are to be found, there only you try to protect them, there only you try to conserve them. For example, let's suppose if we talk about lion-tailed macaque. Now, lion-tailed macaque is present in the region of Western Ghats. Now, if you build a kind of a protected area in the region of Western Ghats, so that, let's suppose, human interventions are less, loss of biodiversity is less, so that the lion-tailed macaque population can not only survive, but over a period of time they can thrive, they can increase in number also. That will be a part of in situ conservation measure. Right. So wherever the species are originally to be found, if you carry out conservation in that region itself, that is what is in situ conservation. So here, examples of in situ conservation. Yes, Femina, perfect. At the site, okay, at the site where the species are to be found. I apologize for the background noise, but sadly we cannot take a corrective step in that case. Construction activities are going on. I hope as long as I am audible, right? So, where the species are to be found naturally. Example, example of this, we can take the case of national parks, wildlife reserves, wildlife sanctuaries, right? Then, for example, marine protected area. Then, for example, biodiversity or the biosphere reserves, for example, the biosphere reserves. Okay, these are basically where the conservation is happening at the site where the animals are found. Then ex situ. Ex situ conservation is, let's suppose you have a species, for example, which is endangered somewhere, and you have to protect them. You have to ensure the conservation of those species. Now you will carry those species somewhere to ensure a holistic conservation, right? So where you carry the species somewhere else to ensure a holistic conservation, that is ex situ conservation, away from the site where they are naturally found. Example, example, you have zoos, botanical gardens, very good. See, by now all of you are well versed with these particular areas. Very nice to see. Botanical gardens. Then, other than that, plant nursery is good. Herbarium, very good. Orchards, aquariums, seed banks, gene banks. These can basically be example. Very good. So in this case, what you are doing is you are carrying these species somewhere else, and then you are ensuring everything to conserve them. You are giving them proper amount of food, you are protecting them from hunting and poaching, you are ensuring that they get adequate amount of anything which is required to survive. But this has got a limitation associated with it, because this has got a limitation in the sense that historically we have seen that the species which have been brought in protected areas, the survival rate which have been brought somewhere else and into the protected areas, the survival rate is very, very less in that case. That is, in protection, under that particular scenario of protection, and in a zoo, or let's suppose in a botanical or any kind of a safari like that, generally you will find that for example, the species, they don't reproduce, right? The species, they themselves are able to survive, but the next generation of it becomes difficult to propagate. So that is where there is a limited success associated with ex situ conservation. Having said that, when we talk about critical plant species, for example, now, the plant species which can be destroyed by construction activities, by extension of agriculture, or even pharmaceutical companies simply hunting them out. So basically, those particular species can significantly be conserved. Okay. And the genetic variety can always be conserved quite sufficiently in the case of ex situ, but then otherwise, holistically, in situ conservation is much more efficient, because the natural landscape, the habitat, and the animals or the species ecological niche, its biological role in the entire ecosystem, that is given a greater care of. Okay. It can cause the issue of adaptation also, and the freedom is, yes, agree. Now, cryopreservation, cryomesh technology will come under the category of ex situ conservation. Now, here we talk about wildlife sanctuary. Now, when we talk about wildlife sanctuaries, understand, under the legislations or the provisions of the Wildlife Act 1972, you had the provisions to build the protected areas. Now, these protected areas, be it the wildlife sanctuary, be it the national parks, be it the tiger reserves, all of them, elephant reserves, all of them, they gain their legitimacy from the same act. And that is the Wildlife Act of 1972. Okay, all of these. They gain the wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, then, for example, tiger reserves, elephant reserves. It is under the provision of the Wildlife Act 1972 only where you have the details of where you can establish the wildlife sanctuary, what are the role that the chief warden will play, what are the role played by the conservator of forest. So all those are detailed in the various sections of the Wildlife Act itself. So what are wildlife sanctuaries? These are basically the sanctuaries that are naturally occurring areas that are meant to protect the endangered species from hunting, poaching, and predation. Human activities like harvesting of timber, collecting minor forest produce, and private ownership rights are allowed as long as they do not tinker or interfere with the well being of animals. So, here, basically, when we talk about it, wildlife sanctuaries, if you consider the gist of it, wildlife sanctuaries generally are species specific, that the aim is to protect a particular kind of a species. National parks, they always are opened or established with the aim of conserving the entirety of the landscape. The entirety of the ecosystem that needs to be conserved. I will repeat. Wildlife sanctuaries, which are opened and established in various parts, they are generally established with a species in orientation, a species that is in focus, that you have to conserve, that you have to protect, and you build a strategy around them. When we talk about national parks, we are talking about the larger issue of conservation around the entirety of the landscape, entirety of the ecosystem, including the flora and fauna of that area. Wildlife sanctuaries, there the regulations are slightly bit relaxed, in the sense that some amount of human activity, sustainable human activity, sustainable, let's suppose forest wood collection, timber collection by the local population. So in the case of the wildlife sanctuaries, there is slight amount of human activities which are still permitted. National parks, they are very stringent. The regulations are very, very stringent. Their human activities are not at all allowed. Okay, so there, if in case I don't know if how many of you have traveled to the wildlife sanctuaries and the national parks. Mostly, if you cross through the national parks, you will be given an entry time and exit time. You are not supposed to stay in that national park for more than a particular stipulated amount of time, given how big the national park is. If it is not very, very big, then maybe within 2 hours you are supposed to exit that national park. So it is the one which is which has got the imperative of very strict regulations. Wildlife sanctuaries a bit relaxed, right? So here, the Wildlife Act of 1972 provided for the declaration of certain areas by the state governments as the wildlife sanctuaries. Okay. However, under certain conditions, even the central government can declare this. Under certain conditions, under certain conditions, the central government can also can also declare areas as wildlife sanctuaries. Okay. Now, all those ambitious amongst you, we have many ambitious people amongst ourselves. So, all those ambitious people who have an aim that we will rectify and mug up all the wildlife sanctuaries. So, just for you, there are 567 existing wildlife sanctuaries in India, covering a large area, which is 3.73% of the geographical area of the country. So, if you have the wherewithal to remember 567 wildlife sanctuaries, all the good luck to you, all the best in your life. But generally, I would suggest please don't go for learning the wildlife sanctuaries. Only take a look at few of the wildlife sanctuaries which have been in news over the past year. For example, what wildlife sanctuaries are. For example, when we talk about, let's suppose, Pabitora Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, Pabitora is situated in the Brahmaputra Plains, in the region around Budamayong in Assam. Now, that is also one of the very mystic places. Assam is full of various different mystic places if you have visited that place. So, Budamayong is again one of the very famous mystic places in Assam. Now, there you have the Pobitora Wildlife Sanctuary, where the population of one-horned rhino, the density is amongst the highest. The density of the one-horned rhino is amongst the highest. That is why always said that if you want to have a sure shot sighting of this one-horned rhino, do visit the region of Pabitora. So here, the Pabitora, basically, it is on the southern part or southern bank of Brahmaputra. So here, in the region of the plains and Budamayong that make up the entirety of the Pabitora Wildlife Sanctuary. Here you will find migratory birds, wild boars, golden jackals, rhesus macaque, right? Barking deer, the Indian leopard, and one-horned rhino with its highest population in the entire world. Now, in the region of Assam, there had been a kind of a consistent decline in the rhino population. You know, at one point of time, and I'm not talking about millions of years back in history, I'm talking about quite recently, around 200 years back, almost around 200 years back. You had a scenario where in the northern part of Uttar Pradesh, that is the Himalayan foothills, the Tarai belt, cross over to the boundary of Nepal. northern part of Bihar, cross over to the boundary of Nepal, northern part of West Bengal, all the way to the Assam plains. That entire region had the rhino population. Having said that, these rhinos were hunted incredibly at a very fast pace during the time of the British colonization, obviously. And our own Maharajas also did the trick. So basically, they would hunt these one horned rhinos for their horn. And the horn that they have, it is actually made up of very thick hair parts. So that is a unique collectible that people would have. And the rhino skin also would be collected. So in the beginning of the 1900s or the beginning of the 20th century, the rhino population had declined in the region of Assam to almost around double digits. Since that point of time, there has been a prolonged effort. After independence, that effort really picked up with Kaziranga National Park and the region of Manas, Kaziranga, and all these protected areas taking the lead in protection and conservation of rhinos. Now, you had an India Rhino Vision of 2020, which was formulated. The aim of it was that by the year 2020, we have to increase the rhino population in the state of Assam to almost 3,000. Now, 2020, obviously, the census could not be carried out because of the COVID pandemic. Now, when the census was carried out last year, it was found out that rhino population has crossed over the population or the number of 3,000. So, over a period of time, we have managed to bring the population of one-horned rhinos back to sustainable limits. You don't only have to conserve few of the species. That 50 species are there, fair enough, they will survive. No. You need to have enough survivable and viable population so that in case there is an untoward incident, still you have a survivable and viable population which reproduces naturally. Whenever any animal is in stress, the process of multiplication of the population will never happen, right? So the animals, they multiply in numbers only when they have a substantially relaxing, calm environment around them. So as per the Indian rhino vision, from the region of Pabitora, you had the in a way relocation of rhinos into various other protected areas of Assam as well. So here basically, if you take a look at it, as per the provisions or under the Indian Rhino Vision, basically, which was a joint program of the Department of Environment, Forest and Climate, Government of Assam, WWF India, International Rhino Foundation, and US Fish and Wildlife Sanctuary, 6 rhinos were translocated or relocated from Pabitora to Manas, right? And earlier also 2 rhinos have been located from Pabitora to Manas. So this relocation has taken place quite significantly. What was the India Rhino Vision? So this was launched way back in 2005. And the effort was to attain a wild population of at least 3,000 greater one-horned rhino spread over the 7 protected areas of Assam. Which are those 7? Kaziranga, Pabitora, Orang, Manas, Laukova, then Burachapori, and Dibru Saikova. In all these areas, the effort was to increase the number of rhinos so that cumulatively the number of rhinos increases by to around 3,000. And we have achieved that. So that is one of the success that we have. Then Korenga Wildlife Sanctuary, again in the region around the Godavari Delta, the Krishna Godavari Deltaic area. Now, that is a region where you will have close to the Kakinada beach. That is why I was telling you that Chavan, Kakinada is not that bad to visit at this point of time, because at this point of time you will have so many migratory species in the region of Kakinada. So the mangrove is developed at the confluence of River Godavari and Bay of Bengal. And more importantly, at this area, you will be able to observe the confluence of the river system into the sea. And when you observe that, you will observe that in the western coast also, in the eastern coast also, but in the region of the Godavari Delta, that river simply branches into so many different distributaries immediately before meeting the sea, that you get to see a variety of the various different types of life forms, variation in ecosystem from the river to the sea. So that is something that you will observe. Home to 24 species of mangrove trees and over a species of 120 birds, making it second largest mangrove formation after Sundarbans. So you will have the critically endangered long-billed vulture, white-backed vulture. They are the main attractions of this sanctuary. Then you also had the Dandeli Wildlife Sanctuary, which was earlier primarily formed for the conservation of tigers. Here, by the way, you also had the sighting of the very elusively rare black panther. Black panther could also be has also been sighted here. But over a period of time, ever since tiger conservation took priority, now you had a situation where the Anshi and the Dandeli protected areas, they were basically combined together to form a larger habitat for the tiger population. So tiger conservation was the key initiative in this. So it is located in the Uttar Kannada district of Karnataka, and along with the neighboring Anshi National Park, the sanctuary was basically converted or declared the part of Anshi Dandeli Tiger Reserve in 2006. Now, Dandeli Wildlife Sanctuary is most famous for the great hornbill. Great hornbill is found in the region of in the Western Ghats, also in the region of northeastern states also, and the Malabar pied hornbill. It is the only known tiger reserve to have frequent sightings of the black panther. Other than this, black panther has also been sighted around the region of Mudumalai. Mudumalai, that is basically Mudumalai, Nagarhole, Bandipur. They are situated very close to each other. They basically share their boundaries with each other. So it in the region of the entire Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, you will have Nagarhole, Mudumalai protected area, and also Bandipur. So there you have such a wide variety of landscape. You have these hills of very dense forest. You will also find dried grasses on the leeward side of these hills, and a kind of a tropical grassland system also, which ensures a large number of herbivore deer population. That deer population is viable enough to support the kind of carnivore population. So around the region of Kabini, River Kabini is the area where River Kabini is one of the basic tributaries of River Kaveri. So there also, in this region also, you'll find black panther sighting. So it is in these areas that sometimes black panther can be sighted. Okay. Now, then after that, we have the national parks. Now, as I told you, national parks have a greater amount of restriction imposed. And when we talk about the national parks, there is a larger conservation at hand, where you are able to conserve, or at least you are aiming to conserve, the entirety of the landscape in question. So they are the areas that aim to protect the natural environment, and they are also involved in public recreation and enjoyment activities. So here the Act of Wildlife Act of 1972 provided for the declaration of certain areas by the state government. Having said that, both wildlife sanctuaries and national parks can be declared by the central government as well. So the degree of protection is greater here than the wildlife sanctuaries. So these particular intricacies, that who will declare them, who can initiate the declaration of them, what is the degree of protection, where it is greater, that is something that can be relevant for your prelims. Okay, and another thing, guys, as you would have noticed by now, in our entire coverage of the PPT and the syllabus, we have in the PPT itself, I have written multiple times what is relevant for prelims and mains. Please do keep that in mind while carrying out the revision. Okay, so as much as possible, I am trying to help you in terms of understanding the focus study, but then rest is up to you. Now, the Haley National Park was the first national park in India, and over a period of time, many different national parks have been established. Now, national park, these are the various different national parks in the country. Now, when we talk about the Haley National Park, presently, what is the national park that Haley National Park is known by what name presently? Are we aware of that? What is the name of the Haley National Park? Haley National Park was the first national park declared of the country. Good. Dudecula, Benica, good. So now it is known as the Corbett Tiger Reserve, that has been established as a tiger reserve, was the first national park of the country. Now, these are the various different national parks, around 110 of these national parks. Now, obviously, If you are able to learn all of them, fair enough. But if not, just look at the latest additions. For all of these, I would rather suggest to you, do visit the website of the government, .nic.in. It is in this website of the government where you will find the detail, the listing of the national parks, Ramsar sites, the new additions, the details of it, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves. So this will be one sort of destination of that. Okay. And that is where you can always do take a look at the latest editions and the portions of current affairs. Slowly and steadily, when you are very thorough with the current affairs of the past 1 year, you yourself will come across many of these protected areas which have been mentioned in news directly or indirectly. And that and basically that is going to be more than sufficient. That idea is going to be more than sufficient here. Okay, just a moment. It will be something which will be absolutely a kind of a diktat on you, that learn this, do this, and then, so by that point, by that logic, I can tell you that learn all the books, you will clear civil services examination. But I'm sure you are aware that is not the solution. So prioritize the portions of current affairs. That is something that you have to take a look into. So Anushka, your question that usually everyone says that you have to learn all the national parks, I tend to heavily disagree with that. In that sense, then what is the purpose of having a streamlined preparation? Then if you are learning all the national parks, you are learning all the wildlife sanctuaries, you are building a 5-year plan for yourself. You are not trying to clear exam in 1 year. Now, the Kaziranga National Park. Now, Kaziranga National Park, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, now located in the region of the Brahmaputra Plains. Now, here you will find the presence of tigers also. You'll find the presence of elephants also. You'll find the presence of one-horned rhino also. It is here where you'll find that unique elephant grass, where again, as soon as the rains come, these grasses, they grow by almost to almost around 2 meters high. The grasses grow so tall that they can hide an adult grown elephant. That is why the name elephant grass. So that forms a kind of a perfect camouflage for the tigers. That is why this is one of those areas where the animals, they suffer from frequent tiger attacks. Okay, so this is basically the case of Kaziranga. Now, based upon the latest census conducted by the Assam government, there are 2,413 rhinos in the park. And as I told you, in 1905, the number stood at only around 12 individuals. Then you have the Bandhavgarh National Park. Bandhavgarh, situated in Madhya Pradesh. Here, you have the elusive white tiger population which can be sighted. Now, when we say white tiger population, please understand it is not a different species of tiger. It is not like Siberian tiger or the Sumatran tiger. Basically, when you hear about these white tigers, etc., white elephants in certain cases, there you simply have a pigmentation issue, right? The melanin, that basically undergoes some amount of changes, and that is why that coloration is white. It is not a different species of tiger at all. Having said that, Bandhavgarh again is one of those areas where the tiger population is quite significant. Now, apart from the tigers, here you will find cheetal, sambar, barking deer, all of those, as sloth bear. Wild boar. Now, sloth bear is also to be found in the southern part of the country. Sloth bear is basically a species of bear that you will be able to find in the Nilgiris region also. Wild boar, chinkara, barking deer, sambar, everything along with the large bird species. Okay, right? And then, for example, you have the Bandipur National Park. Bandipur National Park, situated in the region of Karnataka in the area around Mysore. At one point of time, pre-independence, this used to serve as the private hunting grounds for the royals of Mysore. They would basically take a trip there to hunt the tiger species, as was the case with almost all the Rajas and the Maharajas at that point of time. They all used to have their private areas of hunting, and most of them, thankfully, have been declared as protected areas now. Because in many of the areas, for example, in the region of Sarguja in Chhattisgarh, that was the place where the Maharaja there actually killed the last surviving Asiatic cheetah very proudly. Asiatic cheetah, the last surviving Asiatic cheetah in India, was killed in 1952. And the Maharaja basically took pride and was proud enough to get a photo clicked with that last cheetah. Right. So basically, the hunting was carried out. Now, it was in 1973 from here where Project Tiger started taking wings. Project Tiger, basically about the conservation of tigers, that started spreading out. Okay. Now, in 1974, the Indian government initiated Project Tiger. It was in 1973 itself that helped to establish the park and put tiger conservation to the forefront. It is the part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, where biosphere reserves are very large protected areas conserving or aiming to conserve the entirety of the biome in that sense. So, Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve will have, as I told you, the Mudumalai, the Nagarhole, the Bandipur, right, and some portions even for the adjoining Wayanad, Mukurthi, all those protected areas are included here. So it is a very extensive natural landscape, one of the most beautiful natural landscapes also, especially during the rainy season. You will find the greenery at its level best, and that is where the wild population also significantly benefits from here. Now, so, Jadeshwar, you would be aware about the Maharaja of Sarguja and his exploits. There are multiple stories which are woven around that. Now, here, basically, the Bandipur National Park shares its boundary with three other national parks: Nagarhole, Wayanad, and Mudumalai National Park. Tigers, Indian elephants, leopard, dhole, samba, all of them, sloth bear, you'll find here also. They are basically found in the region of Bandipur. Now, we also have the protected areas that are the marine protected areas. For example, if we consider an island, now that island also needs conservation. It is a critical habitat. The coastline, that many of the times the coastal beaches, they serve as a kind of an ecotone. There also conservation needs to be carried out, isn't it? Then, for example, immediately in the area of the shelf, there also conservation or protection needs to be carried out. You have some unique species of prawns, of shrimps, and also of very unique species of corals which can be found there. So that also requires conservation. So when we say marine protected areas, these are the areas of intertidal or subtidal terrain, together with the overlying water and associated flora, fauna, and other features which require protection. Now, they are divided into three categories, basically category 1, category 2, category 3A, and category 3B. So, what they are? What is the categorization of it? So, category 1, national park sanctuaries having entire areas in intertidal or subtidal zone. What is intertidal zone? You would have studied that in geography. Basically, if let's suppose this is your coastline, this is the level of water. During high tide, water level comes here. Right? During the case of a low tide, water level comes here. Okay. So this is your high tide line or HTL. This is your low tide line or LTL. This is the zone which is referred to as the intertidal zone. intertidal zone. Okay. So national parks, sanctuaries having entirety of the areas in intertidal, subtidal, mangroves, coral reefs, creeks, estuaries that have critical ecosystem. Category 2, the island areas. Category 3A, sandy beaches beyond intertidal line. And category 3B, evergreen and semi-evergreen forests of the island. So this is basically the marine protected areas. Marine protected areas within them can have multiple different national parks also. Multiple of the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries can be included in a larger marine protected area. Now here, if you observe, for example, in Odisha, you have the region of Bhitarkanika. Now, for example, in the region of Bhitarkanika, you will find that there is significant amount of mangrove population. Mangrove population is very high. Okay, mangrove population is very high. And here you will also find one of the largest crocodile species, that is the saltwater crocodile, which you also find in the region around Sundarbans. That is the saltwater crocodile. Saltwater crocodiles are amongst the largest of the alligator species that you find there. Then, for example, you have the Gulf of Kutch in the region of Gujarat, Sundarbans, which has the largest mangrove population across the country, Gulf of Mannar in Tamil Nadu. Now, accordingly, for Maharashtra, you have the Thane Creek Flamingo Sanctuary. In West Bengal, the West Sundarbans. In Dadra and Nagar Haveli, you have the Dadra Nagar Haveli Wildlife Sanctuary. In Odisha, you have the Gahir Matha. Now, Gahir Matha is where you basically observe the mass hatchings and the mass laying of eggs by the olive ridley turtles. Olive ridley turtles every year come here in large numbers, very large numbers, and they lay their eggs together. And that is when you have the mass hatchings. That mass laying of eggs and the hatching, that is also what is referred to as activity of Aribada. Right? That is where the olive ridley turtles in large number, they are not very large in size, the olive ridleys, right? So olive ridley turtles, they are not very large in size, but they swim over, they come here, and then they start laying their eggs, and the eggs hatch. Now here you see, again, other than Gahir Matha, this is something that you will also observe in the region of Rushikulya, right? In the region of Rushikulya also. Rushikulya is situated where? In Rushikulya also, in Andhra Pradesh. Yes. So there also you will find this activity of Aribada. It is Aribada, it is not Ambada. So Ambada will be a different term altogether. So here, Aribada. I hope I'm able to make that clearer. So that is Aribada, where the mass laying. Now, once people found out that this mass hatching is taking place, immediately that became a tourist destination. Now, that tourist destination basically meant that you had installation. Now, the turtles come to the beaches, they dig slight small ditches, and that is where they lay their eggs and they cover it with a shallow sand. Now, as the eggs hatch, these small turtles, they have the natural instinct. When they are born, they have the natural instinct to be drawn to the sea, aided by the sun, the sunlight. Now, as this came under prominence and as this basically was well known that this mass hatching is taking place, immediately tourists, they start visiting that area. Immediately you had a situation where basically you had large tower lights, halogens, everything was installed. As a result of that, what happened, the turtles which would generally hatch during the mornings and during the days where they would march towards the sea, now the turtles, they started hatching more in odd times, and misguided by the light, they thought the artificial light to be the light of the sun. Rather than walking towards the sea, they started walking inland towards the land. Now these are the species, the young ones, they have hatched few minutes ago. So obviously, strength is not a strong force for them. Strength is not a strong quality for them. They are very, very weak. They have hatched just a few minutes ago. So many of these turtles, small ones, they would immediately die off by the time that they would try to venture inland. They would obviously not never be able to reach the sea. They would start dying off. That is why, thankfully, the government intervention happened. And the government intervention basically removed all these floodlights and removed all the human activities to allow the natural light and the natural processes to take over. Because please understand, many of these species, they have developed a tendency which has prevailed for millions of years. They have evolved over a period of millions of years over into certain natural tendencies. You still will find that certain species in the region of Scandinavia, when they feel that the conditions are becoming rough, they start running westwards, right? And while running westwards, many of them, they fall into the sea. And why is that? Because they have been so well used to for millions of years that lemmings, for example, they have been so used to for running westward, because in ancient times you had the entire supercontinent of Pangaea. North America was attached with Europe. So they've had the species, the tendency was to run westwards. That still prevails. So that is why these species, many of them have got a kind of a tendency, a kind of um, uh, an aptitude which has developed over millions of years. So if you disturb them by human activities, well, you are virtually, in a way, speeding up the rate of extinction. So that is something that you observe for the olive ridley. Now, recently, even fishing in that area has been banned, because what was found out, that these small, very young hatchlings, these are very, very small hatchlings, they are barely able to go through the region of the sand, right? And as they enter into the sea, it takes some amount of time for them to basically go into the deeper waters to escape the predators from the sky, the various different birds that come in. It takes them some amount of time to escape them. Now, they're very vulnerable in the immediate coastline also. That is why they need some amount of protection. So it was found out for a long time that majority of the fish catch happening in the coastline was happening of these young hatchlings. Now, the fishermen won't use them. They are not able to sell them. So that is why fishing was banned, right? So that is basically the case of Aribada, right? You have in Maharashtra, the Malvan Marine Wildlife Sanctuary, very significant coral reef population. You have very unique kind of shrimps also to be found there. So like that, you have basic various different kinds of marine sanctuaries. This you can go through. For this, I won't say that wait for the current affairs. This location, at least, you should be aware of the various different marine sanctuaries across the various different parts of the country. Then we come to the larger conservation areas, that is the biosphere reserves, which will include multiple of these national parks, wildlife sanctuaries within itself. As I told you, the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve will include Bandipur also, Nagarhole also, the portion of Mudumalai also, some portions of Wayanad also, some portions of Mukurthi National Park also. All of them will be included in Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So biosphere reserves are large protected areas. Now, what is the concept behind establishing a biosphere reserve? The basic principle, first of all, understand. For a long point of time, it has now been understood, ever since the late 60s and the 70s, it has now been understood. You cannot conserve the animals in isolation. It is not the case that in the forest, if you don't allow anyone to enter, in a region where, let's suppose, you have certain animals, you don't allow anyone to enter, then those species will be protected. No, someone will enter, someone will eventually go there. So you cannot conserve the animals in isolation. You have to ensure a kind of a coexistence. Coexistence is the way forward for sustainability. So that is where, basically, under the aegis of UNESCO, you had the entire Man and Biosphere program, which was established. Now, under the concept of it, the local population will be made a stakeholder in conservation. The local population knows how to live with that population. The local population will be able to survive with them. And that is where it is the prerogative of the local population also to ensure best conservation standards. But when you establish a biosphere reserve, you are basically establishing a large biome, a large protected area of a biome, which will have multiple different ecosystems, right? You are covering the entirety of the large natural landscape, ensuring that you devote some space for research activities also, research and development activities. Now, what is the research activity that you will carry out in the biosphere reserve or in the forest? There are multiple research activities in the sense that the biologists go there to understand the, for example, hunting pattern, feeding pattern, what is the energy pyramid, what is the requirement of energy, how frequently, for example, a python needs food, how frequently do they need that food, how frequently will an animal need to hunt, what are the various different sources of food that the animal can rely with. So if you have that research, if you have those particular research backings, then you will be able to ensure a sustainable conservation also. So it is for those measures that a biosphere reserve has been established. So it is an international designation by UNESCO comprising terrestrial, marine, and coastal ecosystems. And it is divided into core, buffer, and transition zone. Core zone, which is in the center where no intervention is allowed unless and until you are basically one of the forest officials. No intervention is allowed into the core zone. That is surrounded by a buffer zone. That is surrounded by a kind of a transition zone. Transition zone is where you will find some of the human habitations to where sustainable agricultural activities, etc., or any of the processes which are sustainably and ecologically sustainably carried out, that is allowed in the transition zone. So, primary criteria for the selection of a region as a biosphere reserve, it is a site must contain an effectively protected and minimally disturbed core area of value of nature conservation and should include additional land and water suitable for research and demonstration of sustainable methods, right? So, minimally disturbed core area, okay, additional land and water suitable for research and demonstration of sustainable methods. So that will require a large area. That is why you will find that the biosphere reserves, they are very, very large areas. They are not small areas. These are very, very large areas. So it has got a kind of a three-tiered structure: core area, the buffer zone, and the case of the transition area. The core area involves an entirely secure and protected ecosystem that contributes to the preservation of the landscape, ecosystem, species, and genetic variation. Very, very protected. Human intervention is not allowed here. Buffer. Buffer zone is the one where, let's suppose, ecologically sound practices which will help you in research and development, spreading awareness and education of the masses for conservation of, for example, the safari trips, etc., that are arranged, that happens in the buffer zone. Even while you go for a safari trip, the wildlife safari, they will never take you to the core area. They will never take you to the heart of the core area. This is one of the major predicaments that you, when you visit Corbett Tiger Reserve, it is said that majority of the tiger population is in the core area, right? And core area you are not allowed to go. So that is why majority of the people, ask your friends, your colleagues, your seniors, your parents, most of them, when they would have visited Corbett, all that they would have managed to see is a few buffaloes, a couple of deer, and that's it, right? There is not much sighting of it. It is in the region around Nilgiris, in the region around the area of Maharashtra, for example, Tadoba. That is where, if you go for a visit, you are having a very good chance to have a tiger spotting or a tiger having a hunt also in some of the cases, right? So that is the buffer zone. Then transition, where the greatest activity is permitted for to promote sustainable human development and promote economic activity. So that is the structure of this biosphere reserve. These are few of the biosphere reserves in the country. Again, this is something that you can go through. For example, Simlipal. Simlipal is one of those areas, protected areas in Odisha, where again that is an elephant reserve, and that is also where you will find large amount of tiger population. So, for example, even in Manas, you will find the elephant population also, tiger population also. The largest of the biosphere reserves amongst all of this is the largest. Mujtaba, there also, if you have cleared forest services, then you would be allowed to enter into the core zone. Otherwise, you need very high level contacts, which you will develop after few years in service, not immediately. Official OTs or the officer trainees of Labasna, they don't get that kind of a privilege immediately. So the largest biosphere reserve in India is the Run of Kutch, and the smallest one is basically the Dibru Saikova. Okay, so that is the case of the largest and the smallest of them, right? Great Nicobar, for example, here you will find the leatherback turtle, also one of the largest species of turtle you'll find in the region of Great Nicobar. Dugong population you will find to be present in Gulf of Mannar also. So all of these, they represent a varied variety of landscape. For example, Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve. Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve is not only about the mountains, it is a very wide area. In fact, it is here that you will also find the very famous Valley of Flowers. You will find very unique species of lichens, orchids, and yesterday I was telling you about few of the rare plants that you find in the region of Himalayas. You'll find in the region of the Nanda. So it is very, very large area. Okay. Now, then we come to Project Tiger. Are there large variety of species that can live in the desert areas? So if you talk about the variety of species, that is the species diversity if you are talking about Tanmeno. Species diversity is not very enhanced, depending upon which desert are we talking about. But mostly, you will find varieties of lizards and salamanders. You will find few of the rodent population, the burrowing kind, and reptilian population. The large species, large animals, you won't find. Okay, many of the large animals you won't find. Okay, because the large animals, they will also produce heat. Okay. Now, no, biosphere reserve does not mean it will have a large variety of species. No. Biosphere reserve needs to have a very large undisturbed ecosystem, which will have variety of different types of ecological conditions. Run of Kutch has got lowland, salt pans. Run of Kutch will have the various different species in that desert and lowland also, and the coastal ecosystem around it also will be included there. So here, Project Tiger. Now, tiger population. You have certain countries in the world where you will find tigers naturally in existence, what is also referred to as the tiger range countries. Most of them, they are situated in the region of South Asia. Russia is also one of those tiger range countries. Russia, China, India, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos. Then in Sumatra, you have the Sumatran tiger. So in these areas, you find the tiger population. You also had one of the species of Tanzanian tiger, which went extinct, right? And it went extinct quite recently, around a couple of 100 years back, or 100 year back is when it started going extinct, again because of the hunting mechanism. Now, this tiger population has been declining because of hunting and poaching, because of the threat to biodiversity, the threat to their habitat, and also the lack of food because of fragmentation of habitat, destruction of natural spaces, etc. Now, there has been a need which has been felt for a long time for the conservation of these tiger species. Now, for that, in 1973, the government had launched Project Tiger. Okay, at that point of time, the population of tigers in the wild was only around 1400. Now, under that preview, or under that condition, you had the Project Tiger, which was launched for the chief objective to reduce the factors that cause the diminishing of tiger habitats and manage them, ensure a viable tiger population not just the experimental tiger population that yes, I have 50 of the tigers there, more than sufficient. A viable, which can reproduce naturally also, which can sustain its population naturally also. So that sustainable tiger population for scientific, ecological, economic, aesthetic, and cultural value. Now, National Tiger Conservation Authority was formed in 2005 as per the recommendations of the Tiger Task Force. And this also gains its legitimacy from the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, which was then amended in 2005. Now, if ever you have to change the area of the tiger reserve, you have to declare the area of a tiger reserve. You have to formulate the norms of a tiger reserve. National Tiger Conservation Authority is one of the most apex organizations. That is where the power lies. Okay, because Project Tiger has been given so much power because of the conservation of tigers, requirement of the conservation of tigers, NTCA gains in importance. Here also, you will find that basically these are the areas, tiger reserves are the areas that are generally notified by the state government on the recommendation of NTCA. Here also you will have an undisturbed core zone, and where you have sustainable practices allowed on the boundary of it, that is the buffer zone. Okay. Now, these are the various different tiger reserves of the country. Now, in this also, I would rather suggest to you, go for the state-wise analysis. State-wise, if you start looking into them, that in which state, what are the tiger reserves? For example, in Uttarakhand, if you observe, you have the Corbett, right? You have the Corbett. Then you will have also the case of, let's suppose, Rajaji in the region around Rishikesh, Haridwar. That is where you have the large Rajaji. And then after that, you will also have the Pilibhit Tiger Reserve, right? So, like that state-wise analysis, you can always carry out, and that will be beneficial. It won't harm you, and that will help you understand that how tiger population is concentrated in areas here and here. Okay. For example, in the region of Valmiki Tiger Reserve, in the region of Buksa Tiger Reserve, in the region of Dampa Tiger Reserve, basically the last couple of census have indicated that the tiger population there is very, very less. It was zero sightings in the wild have happened previously. But here in the region, for example, around Mukandra Hills, around Ranthambore, right there you have a viable tiger population. Then it is in this adjoining area of Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and the region of Nilgiris, where a large amount of tiger population will be found. Why here is the case? Because here, from the forest of the Western Ghats to the passage into the Eastern Ghats, where you will find dried forest, so many of the herbivores will be found. So this is the ideal confluence. Many of the herbivores, they end up migrating in between these areas, and the tigers, they like that, right? Any of the hunter species, predator species, they like people migrate, or not people, but basically other prey migrating from one area to another. And here the tigers, they get an unhindered access to a large landscape consisting of many hills and forested area where they can get adequate amount of food. Okay. So that is basically the case of tiger reserves. Now, then, as per the international consensus that we have to save the tigers, we have to conserve the tigers. There was the St. Petersburg Declaration. St. Petersburg Declaration was a global commitment, and this was arrived at in 2010. The aim was that we will be doubling the tiger range countries, the 13 tiger range countries. The declaration was that these countries will be doubling the tiger population by the year 2022. India has managed to do that, but the other countries have not. Few of the countries, most of the countries, due to the increased awareness about conservation, they have increased their level of conservation, but many of these countries, they have been lagging behind. India presently has, India alone has close to 70 to 75% of the tiger population across the world. India alone. Right, that is quite significant. So here, the 13 tiger range countries: Bangladesh, Bhutan, Cambodia, China, India, Nepal in the foothills of the Himalayas, and basically Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, then Malaysia, Russia, Thailand, Vietnam. Vietnam has this year said virtually that it has got zero tigers in the wild. At one point of time, these would be dominated by tigers. Thailand is the country where you will have the famous tiger temples, where you will find many of, as you go for your preparation, many of your colleagues will get the pictures when they get pictures clicked with the tigers. That is in the region of Thailand. So that is basically about the St. Petersburg Declaration, which was arrived at to conserve the habitat and promote the population of tigers. This year, in the month of April, we celebrated 50 years of Project Tiger. And the tiger census, which was carried out, indicated that the number of tigers in the wild has increased to around 3167. Right. Now, tiger census has been carried out. Tiger census is carried out every 4 years. When we talk about tiger census, it is carried out every 4 years. So basically 2006, 2010, 2014, 2018, and 2022, whose numbers were published in 2023. 2006, we had around 1411 number of tigers. This has increased to 3167. Okay, so obviously we are doing something right. We are doing now. There have been various different allegations which have been raised that this is not correct, and that allegation has been raised ever since 2006 itself, that India is not reporting the correct numbers, actual numbers. And by our own ecologists, they have raised this question that we might have around 1200 tigers only or 1100 tigers only, and we are saying 1400. See, it is not the case where you can basically give a clarion call that all the tigers report into that assembly area, we will count you out, and then you can go. So obviously there will be a kind of an error associated with that. That is a part of the mechanism of wildlife, right? You, for example, Sumatran tiger was considered to be to be extinct for a very long time, till very recently it was sighted in the wild. So there is a certain amount of error associated with it, but there is no denying the fact that tiger population in our country has increased. So how do we measure the population? We measure the population with the help of the pug marks. The pug marks of the tiger, each of the tiger is different. Then you have camera traps which are attached with the trees. So any movement which happens in front of that, immediately it starts clicking pictures. And with the help of the stripes, it is distinguished that which tiger are we talking about, because each tiger has got a different stripe. If you talk to the wildlife officials and the rangers, they basically have a name associated with each one of them, and they have the name associated based on the stripes that they have. So they are able to distinguish the tigers just by the stripe patterns that they have. So like that, we are able to arrive at this. We have included technology also. For example, M stripes, cat track technology, all of them has been brought about to bring about reliability in the number of counting. But even now you will find various editorial pieces which tell you that it is saying 3167, actual number might be around 2600. Fair enough, but we are in the right track. At least we are something is being done by the wildlife officials, where they have tightened the control around the hunters and the poachers. They have included the local population in the process of conservation of the tigers. Okay. Achanak Mar, Muskan, that is Achanak Mar. Achanak Mar Amarkantak. Okay. Man Eaters of Rudraprayag is a very good book to study. There you will come across the entire episode of the formation of the first protected area. Why Jim Corbett felt the need to establish a protected area. It is a good book. Do read it. It is very nice. Now, then you have M stripes. Now, M stripes basically, as I told you, is a kind of a modern methodology where we are bringing technology to bring about a better counting and a verifiable counting technique. So M stripes is short for monitoring system for tigers, intensive protection and ecological status. It is a software based monitoring system launched across the Indian tiger reserves by the Indian government's National Tiger Conservation Authority, that is M stripes. Now, few of the protected areas, they are also given kind of an international accreditation, that is CATS, that is Conservation Assured Tiger Standards, that is Conservation Assured Tiger Standards, that is to ensure that the process of conservation is taking place as per a required methodology. Okay. Abhishek, Yeti, Bigfoot, etc. All of these, they are a matter of folklore. So better not to venture into that area. Any reason why tigers are not present in Gujarat? Gujarat has got lions. But on a serious note, Gujarat has got many of the drier areas. And at one point of time, it is said that the tigers would be present there. But see, understand, you cannot have apex predators, multiple apex predators living in the same area. They will not have enough amount of prey associated with available for them. In the region of the eastern part of Aravallis, you find the tigers. But in the region of Gujarat, the conditions get very, very dry. Then we have Project Elephant, which was launched in 1992 for the conservation of the Asiatic elephant. Now, Asiatic elephants, they are slightly smaller. So this is the elephant grass that I was talking about. The elephant grasses, they grow so tall that they can hide a full-grown elephant as well. So elephants were mostly hunted for the trade in their tusks, the ivory that they have. So for that trade, the elephants have been hunted down quite viciously. Now, Project Elephant is a central government sponsored scheme launched in February 1992. It ensures the protection of elephant corridors and elephant habitat for the survival of the viable population of elephants. And it is implemented in almost 16 of the 28 states. Now, here, elephant population, you will find to be spreading around from the region of the northeastern states, in East, West Bengal, Jharkhand, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, portions of Madhya Pradesh also, Maharashtra, then portions of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh also. In all these areas and in north, even in Uttarakhand, that is where Uttar Pradesh also in the foothills of the Himalayas, that is where the latest elephant reserve, which has been established, one of the large elephant reserves which have been established lately, is the Tarai Elephant Reserve. Tarai Elephant Reserve is situated right in the foothills of the Himalayan ranges. So that is where, as I was telling you, that it was that area where earlier you had the rhino population, viable rhino and tiger population also. But the Britishers, they cut down the trees in that area and they hunted down the animals in that area. So obviously, the region around Katarnia Ghat, etc., they have witnessed a decline in the wild population. But there we have established the latest elephant reserve. Now, this species is included in the list of the protected areas according to the Schedule 1 of the Indian Wildlife Act 1972. Schedule 1 basically means maximum amount of conservation, maximum amount of protection. Now, elephants have been largely hunted in the region of Asia for their body parts and for their tusk. So that is why it is included in Appendix 1 of CITES as well. Maximum amount of protection and conservation. Now, it was found out that in certain areas, certain of the protected areas, there is a kind of a pattern for hunting of these elephants. And that is where the Mikey program for Project Elephant was launched. That is, Mikey stands for Mitigation of or Monitoring of Illegal Killing of Elephants. So this was launched in South Asia in 2003 after a COP of CITES. This is relevant for prelims. Tanmay, South India is known to have a large. It is having a large number of elephants. I don't know how many of you were had good consciousness developed at that point of time, or you remember those incidents. But many of you would remember one of the most vicious smugglers that India saw in the name of Virappan. Now, Virappan, who ruled the area around the Nilgiris, basically single handedly has been touted to be responsible for killing of close to around hundreds of elephants. Few of the unofficial figures will tell you that Virappan alone killed around 1,000 elephants and more, right? Just for their tusk and the ivory. So they are very dominant in that region. That is why in the cultural landscape also, elephants have been given a particular importance in these areas. Okay, they are worshipped almost in every part of the country, but in the region of Kerala, in the Nilgiri area of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu also, they are very well regarded. Now, the aim of Mikey was basically to provide the information required by the elephant range countries to prevent the illegal killing and to measure the levels and trends of illegal poaching, where illegal poaching is happening, when it is happening, which part of the year and which season of the year is that illegal poaching getting very, very prominent, and determine the factors for such changes and ensure proper decision making for bringing or banning the trade. So elephant reserves under Mikey program, these are the few ones, but not very important to learn them off, right? Unless and until an elephant reserve is declared under Mikey program within the next 4 to 5 months, not important for to learn. Then we talk about the lion reintroduction program. Now, Asiatic lion in India is found to be present in the region of Gir forests in Gujarat. That is the home of the Asiatic lion. So, in the few of the districts of Gujarat, that is around Rajkot, Junagadh, etc., that is where you will find the lion population, Asiatic lion. Now, Asiatic lion, their population at one point of time was spread across the entirety of the central and southern India also. They require a kind of tropical grassland, savanna kind of an ecosystem where they get natural camouflage and also the herbivore population. Now, African lions, they are found in large numbers across the portion of Eastern Africa, around the region of Kenya, Tanzania, even extending up till South Africa. But Asiatic lion now are restricted only into the region of the Gir forest in Gujarat. Now, as we talked about yesterday, that you don't have genetic diversity in India in terms of the lion population. So there has always been a prerogative, a need which has been felt to conserve this lion population, to protect this lion population. And that is where Project Lion was initiated. And under the concept of Project Lion, basically, under the concept of Project Lion, for a long period of time, you had the concept of relocation of the lions, relocating them from Gujarat so that the vulnerability is reduced. So they are not that vulnerable anymore, right? Maybe due to hunting, poaching, diseases, maybe natural disaster. So that if you have the main population which is damaged, you have another population which can survive. Now, the government of India for decades now has been try to relocate these lions in any of these areas which resemble the kind of ecosystem that Gir forests have. But as per the latest allegations by the Madhya Pradesh Forest Department, Gujarat is overtly possessive of its lions. Now, previously also it has happened. That is when you had around a decade and a half back when this issue was raised, that relocate some of the lions to Madhya Pradesh. Gujarat was very reluctant because Gujarat had its view. The Gujarat state government and the Gujarat wildlife department had its view that lions are a part of the cultural landscape of Gujarat. You have the lions which have been restricted to that area, and the Maldhari tribes which have co-lived with the lions for a very long period of time. They know how to live with the lions. The lions also don't harm them. You have the very famed Bunny grasslands where these lion population thrives. This matter went to the doorsteps of Supreme Court. Supreme Court asked the Gujarat government that relocate the lions to Kuno. Now, Gujarat government way back in 2012 said, but the Ministry of Environment is saying that we are going to introduce cheetah in Kuno. And right now you are saying that we should put lions also in Kuno. So that matter took a backseat. Then Madhya Pradesh government came up with the fact that, okay, you have other areas where you can relocate the lions, because in the northern and the western part of Madhya Pradesh, we have an ecosystem which is very similar to Gir forest. Gujarat government declined. Supreme Court basically gave an order that you should relocate to some of the lions to Madhya Pradesh. Gujarat government appealed that case, and that multiple iterations on the doorsteps of law has been taking place. Till now, Gujarat government has not transferred. The latest development which has happened this year is that now Gujarat government is saying that we will relocate the lions, but we will relocate them from the Barda. We will locate them from the Gir forest to the Barda Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, while Barda is slightly distant from the region of Gir, but it is not so far that, let's suppose, a natural disaster strikes the region of Gir, it will strike Barda also. And if, let's suppose, a disease strikes the region of Gir, it will impact Barda also, because you have multiple different feline species, dog species, etc., which keep on moving between these areas. So while it will carry out that relocation, but it won't be sufficient. Having said that, on the side, or to put the argument of the Gujarat government, they are saying that, look, in the region of Gir, the lion population has been increasing. The latest census data have indicated that the lion population has increased to 674. Now, there have been various allegations of discrepancies carried out in the case of the census data also, but that is the case with the tiger census also. That is the case with every census. Even for us humans, when the population will be counted in census, there will be a lot of issues that will be raised, that double counting has happened, triple counting has happened, you have not count. So that is always the case. But nonetheless, the Gujarat government is arguing that we have managed to increase the population of lions. So that means something must be going right there. If you talk to people on the ground in the region of Gujarat, those of you belonging from there, they take this matter very seriously. They take the matter of conservation of lions with utmost priority and importance, but still, they need to relocate the lions somewhere else to ensure a viable conservation is carried out. And for that, Madhya Pradesh, in the neighboring area or southern part of Rajasthan, is one of the ideal locations, but they have decided to move them to the Barda Wildlife Sanctuary. Let's see over the next year how successful or how unsuccessful that comes out to be. I am from Gujarat, and the authority is very, very concerned and strict for lions. They are very, very strict. Now we come to the case of cheetah reintroduction program. Now, cheetahs, one of the fastest land mammals that you will find. Cheetahs at one point of time were found abundantly to be present in the entire landscape across India. So much so that if you read the account of the Mughals also, they have basically detailed how cheetahs were used as a kind of a complement for hunting, right? They were used. They had trained cheetahs, and cheetahs would be used to, in a way, circle the region where the tigers were present, and they would be used for as a hunting associate, so to say. But cheetahs were always in so large numbers, they were considered to be a nuisance. The Britishers, when they came in, they didn't like that. So they started giving rewards rather. If you hunt an adult cheetah, you would be given 1 rupee. If you hunt a cub, you would be given few paise. Right? And in those times, around 1800s, that was monumental, substantial. People hunted them out to extinction. Asiatic cheetah now is found only in the region of Iran, other than and nowhere else. And there also it is critically endangered. India witnessed the last Asiatic cheetah death in 1952, where the Maharaja of Sarguja officially killed the last surviving cheetah. After that, cheetahs in India were declared to be extinct. Now, India, for ever since that period of time, has been trying to reintroduce cheetahs into India. They have tried incredibly hard to reintroduce cheetahs from Iran. But Iran showed significant amount of reluctance, ever since that around 2011, 2012, that kind of discrepancy was indicated by the ministry, where ministry at the same time was planning to introduce cheetah also and lion also into the region of Kuno. Everybody was aware that ministry doesn't know, this part of ministry doesn't know what the other part is doing. Iran also backtracked that we already have a critically endangered species of cheetah. We send it there, it will die for sure. So there have been various control programs earlier also for the reintroduction, but they have not survived. This time, however, we have brought in cheetahs from Namibia and South Africa, and the reintroduction program is a long program. It is not the end of it. Under this program, every year, the plan is to introduce around 10 to 12 cheetahs into the wild, so that after 10 years, we have some viable surviving population, which then will be able to multiply on its own. The sad part is that when the cheetahs arrived, they arrived here after spending a lot of time in enclosure, in captivity, where they were quarantined so that they don't catch any diseases. Right now, these animals of the wild, they don't do particularly well in captivity. And that is when many of them, they lost the ability to hunt. Few of them, basically in the stress of captivity, the internal organ damage happened. And few of them, a couple of them, basically they amongst the fight between them, there was multiple organ damage to one of them, they died. Now 4 new cheetahs were born here. Now also understand that the African cheetahs, during the months of July, August, September, they are preparing for the winters, the African cheetahs typically. So they develop a thick coat of fur. But in India, during those months, you have heavy rainfall. Now, when you have that thick coat of fur and the heavy rainfall, that can give rise to unsuitable condition, unfavorable condition growth of parasites. And it has been said that in one of the cheetahs also, the radio collar which was installed, that basically induced a cut. And then owing to the moisture and the development of fur, there was development of sepsis, right? Or that got contaminated and they died. But then, ever since that point of time, it has stabilized. But understand, as a part of any reintroduction, it is always going to be the case that few of them won't be able to survive. In our case, the wildlife officials, as had later come to light, many of them were woefully undertrained in order to tackle with the cheetah population, many of them. So they did not have enough training. But slowly and steadily, that is happening. So fingers crossed, going ahead into the future, we are looking at a viable African cheetah population coming and surviving and then thriving in India also. Okay. Now, here, basically, the Asiatic cheetah was declared extinct in India in 1952 and is critically endangered species surviving only in Iran. Indian government has been attempting to reintroduce cheetahs in India since 1960s and 70s, but over the past decade, these plans have gained momentum. Earlier, we had the kind of endeavor to introduce Asiatic cheetahs from Iran, but that faced severe setbacks because Iran backtracked because it is critically endangered in Iran also. Now, the first batch of 8 cheetahs had arrived from Namibia in September 2022, comprising 4 male and 4 female. Now, at that point of time also, many of the candidates, they told me, because it was in so much news, many of the candidates, they started learning the name of these cheetahs. That what if the names are asked? And I always maintained that please, whenever you have a doubt, think about it. What kind of a question will be framed from here? Will UPSC start asking the question that what was the name of the 3rd cheetah and the 4th cheetah? Obviously not. So just take a look at an overview of it, where they have been introduced. That's it. They have been introduced in the region of Kuno National Park. Now, 12 cheetahs from South Africa also arrived in Kuno, right? And basically, eventually, all of them have been now introduced into the wild. They have some of the adaptability issues due to which few of the deaths have occurred. But now, as that quarantine and the adaptation period is over, it is expected that again, when the next year also some reintroduction will happen, few of them will again die. But over the next few years, couple of years, this population can eventually stabilize. Okay? Shiopur, yes. Kuno is in the place in the Chambal region. You have the Shiopir region. Yes. Now we'll be discussing few of the PYQs. We'll do one thing. We'll discuss the PYQs after discussion of this. But before that, why mostly population of predators are in danger, not prey? Because the prey population is not enough. If the prey population would have been enough, the predators would have been good in numbers. Kamlesh, there are often incidents of man-animal conflicts. As such as the role of human population surrounding these protected areas is of quite significance. How do the government policies handle it? You develop anti-poaching policies, anti-encroachment policies. You ensure that the infrastructure building or extension of agriculture which takes place, that does not impact the wild. For example, elephant population frequently ventures into the farmlands. Now people, they think that they are attacking the hutments and the farmlands. No, you have built the farmlands in those areas immediately around the forest. Illegally you have done that, and that too in the recent past. So they are just backtracking through their old path in order to get access to food or water. So that is where nowadays the forest officials, they have come up with an innovative idea of honeybee boxes. So they basically surround the farmland with boxes of honeybees. So as soon as the tusker population or the elephant population comes, these honeybees, they get active, and that is a natural, in a way, deterrence for the elephant population to move. What is the need for cheetah introduction? That is, see, always important. Yes, the rehab in it. So always the cheetah, or always it is important to have as varied a kind of a landscape of predator prey population, as varied a network of ecological system as possible, so that the ecosystem becomes resilient, so that the functional diversity and species diversity in the ecosystem is maintained. Okay. Okay. So the coat for Mushtaba is developed in the case of the cheetah population. The coat is developed because of the they start preparing themselves for the African winters. That is where they naturally develop a coat during these months. Again, they shed that coat in during the summer months. But in India, that time has got monsoonal rains. That is where the infection starts spreading. Right. So let's take a break and let's be back in 15. There again, I would tell you that please, in the case of the international conferences, there it is important to know the backdrop of it. But for the rest of the international bodies, the national legislations, please keep an eye out only for the amendments. There is no purpose looking into the details of the old laws, for example, Forest Act of 1980, etc., Environment Act of 1986. You don't need to concentrate upon that so much. It is only the amendment, for example, what has been the amendment to the Forest Act, which has been carried out this year. That is something which is relevant. Other than that, you can basically skip over through that and skim through that, rather not skip over, skim through that and just go through the scratching through the surface. So now we start with the international conferences. We start with, first of all, the Stockholm Conference. The Stockholm Conference, which was held in 1972. This was held in 1972. Now, this is considered to be the mother of all the conferences when it comes to conservation of nature. As we have already discussed, this is where you had a meeting of multiple different countries, around 113, 114 countries got together around the time of 5th of June 1972. And this was a UN conference on human and environment. So here the declaration of the Stockholm Conference also included the details about how apartheid should not be carried out, that is, the racial discrimination should not be carried out, natural justice should be laid importance to, then also how sustainability should be paid attention to. So the aspect of sustainability was initiated, the discussion was initiated here. Now, here, the triple threats to the ecosystem and the environment were also arrived at. So, when we talk about triple threats, here, what were the triple threats? You basically had pollution, good. Climate change, very good. And other, loss of biodiversity, very good. Of biodiversity. Right. These were identified as the triple threats that need to be addressed. In fact, it is a result of the Stockholm Conference. As a result of that, India also started in institutionalizing various different legislative measures and various different acts for the conservation of environment to take care of the pollution, etc. For example, if I give you the trend of the journey of the legislative reforms or the legislative processes that India brought after the Stockholm Conference, you will find that this Stockholm Conference was held in 1972. In 1972, we also had the Wildlife Act, which was passed. Then in 1974, we had the Water Act, which was passed. Now, which is the statutory body which was formed as per the provisions of Water Act, which is one of the apex body for controlling or taking care of the aspect of pollution? Very good. Beautiful. CPCB. Okay, so that it is very nice to see that you are able to recall that. So that means multiple repetitions have done the job. So see, even that much amount of information that you guys have retained till now, more than sufficient. Just keep an eye out on current affairs, guys. Many of you are in a very good place. So here, 1980, you had the Forest Act, which was passed. Forest Act, which was passed. Then 1981, CPCB is Central Pollution Control Board, right? The statutory organization which was formed as per the provisions of the Water Act. And that statutory organization was given later the responsibility of taking care of the air pollution also. And as per the 1981 Air Act, this was extended to air pollution, also to noise pollution. Then in 1986, you basically had the Environment Act. And then in 2002, to adhere to the norms of Convention on Biological Diversity, in 2002, you had the Biodiversity Act. So these were the legislative measures which were put into place, which have been brought into place in India as per and after the provisions of the Stockholm Conference. Now, this Stockholm Conference, basically, if you will observe, now it was the United Nations Conference on Human Environment held in Stockholm on 5th and 6th of June, 1972. It is as per, yes, the Environment Protection Act, that is 1986, Anurag. That is the Environment Protection Act of 1986. So basically, it was held on 5th and 6th of June, 1972. It is the commemoration of this particular meeting or the conference due to which 5th of June is celebrated as which particular day? World Environment Day. Very good. So this 5th of June is now celebrated as World Environment Day. Environment Day. Now, this Stockholm Conference also led to basically the establishment of United Nations Environment Program. That was also established as a consequence of the Stockholm Conference. Now, this was one of the first declarations of international protection of the environment, including India. 113 states participated and issued and accepted the declaration. And the declaration consisted of a wide gamut of issues, from human rights to natural resources, how they should be safeguarded, sustainable utilization of the resources. Sustainable utilization means it does not mean that you don't use the resources today so that the resources are available for future. No. Use the resources in such a judicial manner that the availability of resources in present day and age That availability of resources shall be maintained even going ahead into the future. That maintenance or that sustainability of resources is maintained for the future generation also. So pollution must not exceed the environment's capacity to clean itself. Non-renewable resources must be shared and should not be exhausted. Development which is carried out, so development should also include the portion of environment, and there should be transfer of technology and finances from the developed countries to the developing countries to help them adapt to the changes. Now, last year, that is in 2022, 50 years of Stockholm Conference was commemorated. Now, that was marked as Stockholm plus 50. So, it was basically hosted by Sweden with the support of Kenya. And that Stockholm plus 50 is a kind of a stock taking exercise. Stock taking, by that we mean that you basically formulate, for example, let's suppose all of you together, four or five of you, decide that we will prepare for civil services. Each of you initiate your own preparation. And then after a couple of months, you meet together to think about and to discuss how much each of and everyone has prepared. What is the progress? So that is the stock taking. So, like that, stock taking exercise was carried out, that what has been the progress made by the various different countries, what should be the future way of action when we talk about the conservation of environment. As I told you, this Stockholm conference brought into place the concept of or the discussion around sustainable development, sustainability and sustainable development. But you still did not have an exact formulation of what do you mean by sustainable development. Does sustainable development mean not entering the forest areas? Does sustainable development mean that you enter the forest areas but use materials in such a manner? So that is where in 1987, for the first time, Brundtland report was basically published. 1987, the Brundtland report was published. Now, this was for the first time that the concept of sustainable development was formulated, it was articulated. So, sustainable development and the concept of sustainable development was articulated. Okay, again, before I forget, couple of reminders to all of you. Tomorrow we are going to have a doubt clearing session. Doubts, you have to send it over to us by late today, end of day today. And also the feedback sheets, as you know the process, feedback sheets shall be rolled out to you. You would be attending multiple batches as of now, so accordingly the feedback also needs to those feedback sheets also need to be filled by you, right? What has been your experience, etc. You need to fill that feedback sheet. Okay, so this was basically, now coming back to the topic, Brundtland report was for the first time that you had an entire encapsulation of what is the concept of sustainability and sustainable development. Now, here, it was basically formalized as per the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development. Now, the Brundtland's Commission characterization of sustainable development is what? Sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising on the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So, use the resources in such a way that the present requirements and needs are met, but at the same time, ensure that enough opportunities and, in fact, equal opportunities are available for the future generation also to be able to fulfill their own demands and requirements. Now, it focused attention on finding strategies to promote economic and social development in ways that avoid environmental degradation, overexploitation, or pollution, right? Sideline less productive debates, because by this point of time, during the late 70s and the early 80s, and understand and start taking a look at the geopolitics of it. By the late 70s and 80s, the global geopolitical debate had entered into the area where everybody was chasing GDP numbers. It was during that point of time where India was also stigmatized during the 70s and the late 60s. India was stigmatized by a very less low growth rate figure of 3 to 4%, what was also infamously referred to as the Hindu growth rate, if you recall the international journals and the international economic circles. So there was always that concept where everybody was chasing the GDP growth. But then the debate immediately moved on to the area that whether economic growth is required, but if you carry out economic growth, that means environment will be degraded. So do we need to protect the environment, or do we need to protect the economy? Now, sustainable development basically said that, look, you can carry out both of them. You can build infrastructure ensuring that the local habitat is, or the local ecosystem is not damaged. So that entire concept of ecology and economy, ecology versus economy as it was turning out to be, that was ably put on the back burner. And that is one of the key principles and the key achievements of that Brundtland report. Now, in 1988, and we are following a kind of a chronology here, in 1988, you had the formation of another international organization where World Meteorological Organization and United Nations Environment Program, they came together to form another international organization, a scientific body which could carry out the detailed study about what is happening in the ecosystem, what is climate change, what are the actual physical manifestations of climate change, etc. And that international body was IPCC. Very good. So IPCC was formed in 1988. Now, IPCC came out with its first assessment report in 1990 and 91, where it told the world that, look, the way in which, or the rate at which we are moving, we are going to destroy the environment within no time. Within a very short span of time, we are going to basically dismantle the entire environment. We are staring at a world where the climate will change, the global phenomena of storms, etc., rising sea level will take over us. So that was indicated by the first assessment report by IPCC, which was published in 1990 and 91. Now, 1992 was when you had 20 years of the Stockholm Conference. And the assessment report was also published. That created some amount of anxiety in the entirety of the world. So in 1992, immediately after that, and also on the auspices of let's celebrate 20 years since the Stockholm Conference, the world again got together in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. And that is where you had the Earth Summit or the Rio Conference. Now, in this Earth Summit, you had three documents which were finalized about forest, Agenda 21 about sustainable development, etc. Or Agenda 21 was more about how we need to look at the entire process of development, how we need to be sustainable in our approach. And here you had three conventions which were finalized. Conventions. What were the three conventions? First was the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. It is a conference of parties of this UNFCCC, which is being held in Dubai as we speak. Other was United Nations Conference to Combat Desertification. Okay. Other was Convention for Biological Diversity. Right. These were the three conventions which were arrived at. Now, the funding mechanism for these conventions initially were different, but now you have the funding which is carried out by Global Environment Facility. Global Environment Facility. Okay, so this is the funding agency for all these three different conventions. Funding body. World Bank acts as a trustee for this GEF. World Bank acts as the trustee. In the PPT, I have included the written details about GEF and all of these also. So just ensure that you revise it multiple times so that you don't tend to forget it. Tomorrow, if possible, I will give you the entire flowchart also about the various different protocols and conventions so that it is easier for you to memorize. Now, when we talk about the Earth Summit, now the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development was held in Rio de Janeiro, and that was the Rio Summit. Now, it was a major UN conference held from 3rd or 14th of June in 1992, and it was attended with a lot of fanfare by the heads of state, by the various different NGOs, activists, etc. Everybody attended that. So it was a kind of a major gala of sorts. Now, here you had basically three documents which were finalized. One was basically the Declaration on Environment and Development, or the Rio Declaration. Another was Agenda 21, and the other was the Forest Principle. So basically, this declaration on environment, or the Rio Declaration, just like in G20, you had the Delhi Declaration that all the countries agreed to a common principle. Similarly, here also, at the end of that Rio Summit, you basically had the all the participating nations, all the participating members, they talked about that how you need to talk about the environmental conservation, control of pollution, etc. So they laid down 27 broad non-binding principles for environmentally sound development. You also had Agenda 21, which outlined global strategies for cleaning up the environment and encouraging environmentally sound development, right? And then you had the Forest Principle. The Forest Principle, it is formally a non-legally binding authoritative statement, and it is the principle for management, conservation, and sustainable development of all types of forest. Because the larger aim behind this was that, look, natural vegetation is very much important and is responsible for maintaining the variety of flora and floral and faunal species. So if you don't have that natural vegetation, then basically all of this becomes endangered, right? All the biodiversity becomes endangered, so you need to conserve the forest. So these were the three documents. The Rio Declaration, which is generally expected, the declaration is expected after any major summit to indicate that all the participating member countries are on the same page and they have the same common goal. So that was the Rio Declaration. Then you basically had Agenda 21, which talked about the sustainable management and going ahead with the sustainability or in terms of development. And you had the Forest Principles. But more important was the three agreements or the three conventions. One was the Convention on Biological Diversity, something that we have studied yesterday. Convention on Biological Diversity. It is a binding treaty requiring nations to take inventories of their plants and wild animals and basically conserve the species. Now, Convention on Biological Diversity has got two protocols. Which are the two protocols? Do we remember them? The two protocols associated with CBD? Very good. Beautiful. Nagoya. Nagoya is for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of biodiversity, and other was Cartagena. Very good. Kyoto, we have not even discussed, my dear friend, till now. Kyoto will discuss now. Kyoto is associated with UNFCCC. So this was for the sustainable use of biodiversity and for biosafety of LMOs, living modified organisms. This dealt with LMOs and development of biotechnology. And this dealt with the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of biodiversity. So that was your CBD. Then you had UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it is a kind of a binding treaty to reduce their emission of carbon dioxide, methane, and other different types of greenhouse gases. Right? Greenhouse gases. Remember, you had the Montreal Protocol to the Vienna Convention in 1987, which basically talked about controlling the ozone depleting substances. Right? like, for example, methyl tetrachloride, hydrochlorofluorocarbons, chlorofluorocarbons, etc. This was about the greenhouse gases, okay, which lead to global warming. Then you had United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and it is basically aimed at addressing desertification and the droughts caused and the expansion of the deserts. So basically, the convention, UNCCD's conventions 2018 to 2030 strategic framework, is to aim to develop or to attain land degradation neutrality. What is the concept of land degradation neutrality? It is very similar to net zero emissions or carbon neutrality. What is that? So it basically talks about a situation where, let's suppose, in a year, India experiences degradation of 50 hectares of land. Let's suppose 50 hectares of land have been degraded in India somewhere, let's suppose in northeastern region due to infrastructure development, etc. That means in that year, India should have brought 50 hectares of land under reclamation. It should have reclaimed 50 hectares of land from somewhere else that year, brought it under use for biodiversity, afforestation, reforestation, anything. Made that made that land a kind of a natural ecosystem use. So that means the amount of land which is degraded, you are reclaiming the same amount of land from somewhere else. So that is basically land degradation neutrality. Okay. So you had the conference of parties to this, UNCCD, which was held in September of 2020 in India, where you had innovative measures such as the drought toolbox, where you also had basically the discussion about the green wall, which would be built across Africa in the Sahel region of Africa. The plan is to develop a kind of a green wall. Green wall doesn't mean a wall which is painted green. Green wall basically refers to a plantation of hedges and trees forming a kind of a boundary which doesn't allow for the expansion of deserts. As we have talked about it multiple times, when we talk about, let's suppose in India, had the Aravallis not been there, the deserts of Rajasthan would be spreading significantly at a very fast pace to the eastern parts. Very fast pace, it would have spread to the eastern parts. So that is where the destruction of the Aravallis by the sand mining mafias that you have. Now, the destruction of the Aravallis is basically leading to increased spread of the desert, the Thar desert. That is why in the region of Madhya Pradesh, particularly the Chambal region, right, Bamor, Morena, Gwalior, Guna districts, in the region of southwestern part of even Delhi NCR, in the portions of southern part of Haryana, in the Shekhawati region of Rajasthan, in all these areas nowadays, you will start observing large number of sandstorms, very vicious sandstorms, something that was a sight only restricted to the movies earlier. That is basically the spread of Thar desert. So that is where, when newer areas they get converted, they basically have the deposit of that sand. That region becomes unproductive. That region is not very productive anymore. And that is when we say that the region has been converted into a kind of a barren land, or the region has been desertified. Okay. Now, here, when we talk about the Framework Convention on Climate Change, this is one of the most important convention to be arrived at this particular Earth Summit or the Rio Summit. Now, it is an international environmental treaty arrived at the Earth Summit, and it aims at reducing emission of greenhouse gas in order to combat global warming. Right? Bonn Challenge is also related to combating land degradation. Yes, very good. We'll study about Bonn Challenge also. Desertification and degradation are different. Yes, degradation is a decline in quality of the land, a decline in productivity. Eventually, it can lead to desertification also. Okay, but degradation means that the land quality has declined. Maybe soil erosion has happened. Maybe the fertility has declined. Maybe the soil has turned saline. That is referred to as degradation. Now, the stated objective is to achieve stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a low enough level to prevent sufficient amount of warming. As we have talked about earlier also, the concentration of these greenhouse gases has led to increased rate of warming, due to which the temperature has been consistently rising up. Now, the treaty as originally framed set no mandatory limits on the greenhouse gas emissions for the individual nations and contain no enforcement provisions. So it is not legally binding. Okay. So it is considered legally non-binding. No, degradation and erosion is not the same. Erosion can lead to degradation, but there are other things which can lead to degradation also. So here, basically, legally non-binding, this is relevant for your prelims. Okay. Then, after 10 years of this Rio summit, after 20 years of this Rio summit, that is in 2012, you had again a commemoration which was held, that was Rio plus 20. You also had Rio plus 10, which was celebrated in Johannesburg summit, where concepts of sustainability and sustainable development was discussed in 2002. But in 2012, that conceptualization of sustainable development happened at a much greater pace. It was only in 2015 when that sustainable development goals were adopted. And sustainable development goals, which you already study in the portion of social issues. So SDGs, they were implemented in 2015, and they have to be achieved by when? What is the target date to achieve SDGs? 2030. Very good. So that is the target date to achieve the SDGs. SDGs you will study in the portion of social issues. That is why I'm not including here. But for your examination, at least for your mains portion, you should be knowing those SDGs, the number of those SDGs, because there are 17 such SDGs. You should be able to recall what is SDG goal number 1, SDG goal number 2, so that you are able to encapsulate in your answer writing, and that will provide authenticity to your answer. It will give you a comparatively and more marks as compared to your competition. So this Rio plus 20, it built up on that concept of sustainable development. So it was the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. The main objectives were securing renewed political commitments on sustainable development, right? So that everybody agrees that we need to carry out sustainable development, assessing the progress and implementation gaps in meeting already agreed upon commitments, and then addressing new and emerging challenges for sustainable development also. Now, here, in order to carry out sustainable development, or in order to witness sustainable development, you need to attain a kind of an economic development, right? So sustainable development basically stands on three vital pillars. What is sustainable development again? Utilize the resources in such a judicial manner that you are able to fulfill the present needs, and simultaneously able to fulfill the future generation is also able to fulfill their needs. So judicious utilization of resources is important. Now, in general, you will find it is in many of the poorer countries, developing nations, where you will find that the environment, in the phase of development, the environment is exploited viciously, because due to lack of economic development, you will have various different groups, various different hunters, poachers, etc. They will basically be significantly stressing upon exploitation of the natural resources. Smuggling activities will be very prominent. Deforestation will be very prominent. For example, in northeastern part of the country, deforestation has been actively pursued in the nexus with the private companies that you have, the plywood private companies, the bureaucrats in that region. All of them, they have carried out systemic amount of deforestation in the region of Mizoram, etc. Now, why is that? That is because there is lack of economic development in that area. Then, if there is a lack of social development or social justice, that can also lead to exploitation of the environment. Right. So economic development, social development, and environmental protection, these are the three pillars of the sustainable development. Right. So you can achieve that by poverty reduction, clean energy usage. That is how overall sustainably you can develop in an area. This was the Rio plus 20 conference. Now we come to the Kyoto Protocol. So basically, when we talk about UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, this is a convention. In order to set the targets, in order to show the pathway how to achieve greenhouse gas emission, you need a protocol. So, the third conference of parties for UNFCCC, third COP, was held in Kyoto, Japan. It was here that the Kyoto Protocol was arrived at. Now, Kyoto Protocol, what it did, it set targets in terms of emission standards. Emission standards as compared to what? As compared to 1990 levels. That you have to reduce the emission as compared to what you have emitted in 1990. Okay, so basically, Kyoto Protocol was amongst the first international treaty to set legally binding targets to cut greenhouse gas emissions. It was adopted on 11th December 1997 in Kyoto, Japan, and the agreement, which entered into force in 2005, was eventually ratified by 192 parties, had since been superseded by the Paris Agreement. Now you have the Paris Agreement into force. Paris Agreement in itself was arrived at in 2015 and was implemented 2019 onwards. Now here, the countries that had ratified this Kyoto Protocol commit to the reduce of emissions of carbon dioxide and five other greenhouse gases: methane, nitrous oxide, SF6 or sulfur hexafluoride, hydrofluorocarbons, and perfluorocarbons, or engage in emission trading if they maintain or increase emissions. So basically, you had the countries getting a target that you cannot emit more than this. If you are emitting more than this, let's suppose, if you are emitting more gases than this, if this is your target, and you are emitting more than this, then this you have to go for offsetting. And how do you do that? You trade in terms of credits, right? Maybe you help another country install a kind of a renewable energy plant, which will reduce emission in those countries. So in a way, across the globe, somewhere else you are helping reduce the emissions. If you yourself are not able to control your emissions, maybe somewhere else you are controlling the emissions so that the global emission is tackled for. That was the beauty of Kyoto. Kyoto is well known for the Kyoto Protocol is well known for development of this innovative market mechanism. Because earlier it was the experience was that if you set a target, binding target for the countries basically can come to your face and they can basically come to you and tell you that we have been unable to meet the target, so what? Now what to do? Then you won't have an alternative. You cannot drag those countries to International Court of Justice, can you? So that is why market mechanism was innovated. That if, let's suppose, you have more emissions, get the credit, earn credit from somewhere. How do you earn credit? Maybe help the developing and poor countries like India to develop some amount of, let's suppose, renewable energy plants, solar plants, wind power plants, etc. Or help another developed country like Germany to maybe develop a renewable energy source which helps them get rid of fossil fuel burning as they're doing right now. So with that, you can earn credit, you can reduce emissions somewhere, and then that excess part that you have exceeded the target, you will be able to compensate that. Now, this followed the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, what is known as CBDR. Now, what is this concept of CBDR? It basically talks about the fact that the US, UK, parts of European Union, they themselves alone are responsible for more than 50% of the carbon dioxide emissions which have happened in the past century. They are responsible for most of the major climatic debacles that we are seeing right now because of excessive amount of emissions. So while it is the responsibility of the entire globe to take care of the environment, but there is a greater responsibility to be shared by these developed nations. So that is where the concept of Common but differentiated responsibility came into place. Now, this protocol mandated that 37 industrialized nations plus European community, they have to cut their greenhouse gas emissions by an average of 5% below 1990 levels. Right. So whatever was their emission in 1990, you have to reduce the level of emission. So let's suppose in 2000, when we talk about the implementation of Kyoto, so by 2000, let's suppose you have to ensure that the emission is such, which is 5% less than the 1990 levels. Why this was important was that generally with the growth of with the developmental growth or economic growth, the emissions also keep on increasing. So if you bring that under control, that means you don't allow it to grow, but you reduce it as compared to 1990 levels. Already you are doing your substantial bit in order to control the environment. More significantly, when you talk about the global headmaster, the so-called headmaster, which loves preaching all the other countries about what to do, how climate is the most important thing in the world, the US. The US never agreed to be a part of the Kyoto Protocol. That is the irony of it. While it would force the other countries, it would dictate the other countries, it would tell the other countries what to do. US never agreed, and US never agrees to any of the targets, binding targets on itself. The private sector in US will never allow that to happen. That is why whenever the diktats come from that western part of the world, always it has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because those are the ones, those are the countries in European Union, in the region of US, etc. They love telling the world what to do, but they won't do the same thing. So US was not a part of this. Right. Now, in December 2012, after the first commitment period, the first commitment period was 5 years, basically from 2008 to 2012. That was the first commitment period. Now, by that point of time, you needed to have another set of agreement or protocol to talk about the future. But by 2012, you did not arrive, the world could not arrive at a global consensus, because there was a lot of discontent in the world that you have the European countries and the North American countries, they are not doing their bit. And the discourse has changed to India and China that, now you guys are polluting, so you guys should fulfill the obligation. Now we are not responsible. We had polluted earlier. So now take money from India and China. But China was growing. China had improved on the economic scale. India is still underdeveloped on many parameters. We have the developmental requirements. So these developing countries, they were significantly disillusioned by the impact of this protocol. That is why in 2012, rather than arriving at a new agreement immediately, you had the Doha Amendment. And that Doha Amendment, that extended the plan period for the implementation of Kyoto Protocol up till 2020. That is, from 2012 to 2020, that brought about the second basic plan period. That was the Doha Amendment. So, the overall plan period for implementation of Kyoto Protocol would be from 2008 all the way till 2020. Thankfully, in 2015, Barack Obama played an instrumental role in arriving or in bringing about a global consensus, and the Paris Agreement was arrived at. And in Paris Agreement, the things were very different. Rather than setting a legally binding target, the countries were said that you yourself decide your target, that what is it that you can do. That was referred to as the INDC, intended nationally determined contribution. You decide how much you can control. Every 5 years, give us a report of what is the amount of things or what is the level of completion of those achievements. Every 5 years, you have to upgrade your targets. The INDCs need to be upgraded. That was the innovation of Paris Agreement. But the irony of it is that Barack Obama, who was very, very instrumental in the formulation of the Paris Agreement, in 2016, US saw the election of Donald Trump. And when Donald Trump came into power, US again withdrew from Paris Agreement, because Donald Trump famously was the opinion that climate change is a kind of a conspiracy by few of the scientists and countries like China and India to extract money from US. So Donald Trump immediately withdrew. So with that kind of a policy uncertainty, with one of the largest economies of the world, the largest economy of the world, has not done any service to climate change. Now, if we take a look at it, the Kyoto Protocol, under the Kyoto Protocol, the governments were separated into three general categories. That is the Annex 1 countries. Now, Annex 1 countries are the developed nations who have adopted the targets. They have gotten the targets to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and they must submit an annual greenhouse gas inventory in order to indicate that how much they are emitting, actually how much they are emitting, so that a proper stock take can be taken. Then you had Annex 2. So Annex 2 parties basically they are consisting of the OECD members, right? That is the West European countries of Annex 1, but not the East European, which are also the economies in transition. They are required to provide financial resources to enable developing countries to undertake emission reductions. That is one of the other divisions. And the third division, in which you had countries like India, etc., which were lying, they were regarded as non-Annex 1 countries. They were regarded as non-Annex 1 countries who have no obligation but may eventually participate in the clean development mechanism. Clean development mechanism, as we will see, is that mechanism where, let's suppose, a developed country like US, even though it was not a part of it, let's suppose US has exceeded its targets. Now, how will it earn or offset this excess emission? By earning credits. So there are two ways to earn credit. One way is that you implement a kind of a non-emission project, a kind of a renewable project in another developed nation. Right? Another developed nation. You implement a project here, you earn credits. Or you can also implement a project in developing nations, underdeveloped part of the world. And there also you can earn credits. So if you do this in another developed nation, like let's suppose US or UK brings about a developmental project in Germany or Canada, that will be what is referred to as joint implementation. Okay. And if it implements that in countries like India, it will be clean development mechanism. So non-Annex 1 countries, such as countries like India, they did not have an obligation. They did not have a target. But if a project would be implemented there, they could always benefit from it. Okay. Now, the market mechanism basically was introduced under the case of Kyoto. Now, you had three ways in which you could earn the credit. First was joint implementation. Now, what is that joint implementation? The concept of joint implementation. So it talks about the fact that, let's suppose you have an advanced country A, which is unable to meet its target. Unable to meet its target. Okay. Now, when it is unable to meet its target, basically, there it can implement a kind of an emission reduction project in another developed country B. Okay. So basically, it can implement a project in B by providing technological know-how sharing, financial assistance. And there, let's suppose it has implemented a project which has the potential. Let's suppose, example, project has the potential to reduce emissions by 50 tons of CO2 equivalent. So as a result of that, it will get credit worth 50 tons. worth 50 tons. Right. So this credit worth 50 tons will be given to that advanced country A, which can help it to meet its own target. So if a developed country is helping the emission reduction in another developed country, it is included in the part of joint implementation. And the developed country A will earn credit in the form of emission reduction units, ERU. I'll give you the detailed definition of each one of them also. Don't worry about it. Why can't it meet the targets in developed nation? That is basically understand that suppose I have an economic pathway of growth. So, for example, if tomorrow India is given a target that you cannot emit any more gases as compared to what you were emitting in 2000, can we achieve that target? Obviously, no. Can we say to the people that don't move vehicles on the road because vehicles are polluting? Can we say to the industries that shut down or deploy the new machineries, otherwise we won't allow you to operate because we have to meet our targets? No. For example, let's suppose Reliance Industry, it is planning to set up a new refinery. It will have emission. Let's suppose you're planning to implement a new thermal power plant because you need power for the larger section of population, because the summers you have power scarcity in many parts of the country. You cannot stop that emission from happening, can you? So, like that, every country has got its own pre-decided set of emissions, which it cannot curtail immediately. It might be able to curtail it 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, but not immediately. So that is why many of the countries, despite having the stiff targets, they were unable to meet the targets. They were always found to be exceeding that target. Right? Okay. I hope that is understood, Mustafa. Now, then you had the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism. Here again, the similar mechanism of earning credits. Only difference is that in the case of joint implementation, it happens between two of the developed nations. In the case of the CDM, it happens between one of the developed nations and another developing country, let's suppose like India. Right? So in this case, you earn the units, you earn the credit in the form of certified emission reduction, okay, which can help you meet the target. Then you also basically, the clean development mechanism also talked about the development or the establishment of an adaptation fund. The purpose of the CDM was to help developed countries fulfill their commitments to reduce emission, assist developing countries to achieve sustainable development. This was the dual objective of clean development mechanism. Now, you also had the establishment of an adaptation fund, which basically talked about financing of projects and programs that help the vulnerable countries in vulnerable communities in many of the underdeveloped and developing nations to achieve and adopt the goals of climate change. Okay. Then you had emission trading. Let's suppose you have excess emission. Now, another country, let's suppose you have two countries. One is Japan, another is, let's suppose, UK. This is the target that has been set. Now, if let's suppose UK is exceeding the target, but Japan has got a kind of a leeway because it has overachieved, it has not had this much amount of emission. So Japan will earn this much credit because it has managed to keep its emissions below the target. Now, UK needs to offset this. So that is why this trading can happen. Okay, so it will happen between two of the advanced countries. So you provide the money for any of the emission project and you get AAU. Okay, so this is your various different credits. So carbon credit, basically when you talk about the entire mechanism of carbon credit, so it talks about the tradable certificate or permit which has got financial value. One carbon credit is equal to 1 ton of carbon dioxide or 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. That is considered to be the carbon credit. It is traded in the international market. It is the holder of the carbon credit has got the right to emit equal amount of carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalent also. So that is the case of carbon credit. Now, you have the certified emission reduction. So it is a kind of a carbon credit which is traded in the case of clean development mechanism we have discussed between one developed and one developing nation. ERU, it is a resultant of joint implementation between two developed nations. Okay, so the market mechanism, again, if I have to recap the market mechanism, if let's suppose you are unable to meet a target, you implement a project for emission reduction in another developed nation, joint implementation. You earn ERUs. If you are unable to meet the target, you implement a project of emission reduction in a developing nation, clean development mechanism, you earn CERs. Right? This is a way of earning carbon credits. What are carbon credits? These are tradable carbon certificates. Okay? Now, carbon credit, carbon trading, it is an exchange of credits between nations designed to reduce emission of carbon dioxide. It allows the countries to sell carbon credits for money. Under the Kyoto Protocol Climate Agreement, carbon credit are used in market-based system. And the carbon trade also refers to the ability of individual companies as well, to trade polluting rights through the cap and trade. That, let's suppose you are emitting more than, let's suppose India to tomorrow, 10 years from now, India sets a limitation that automobile industry will not be emitting more than 50 tons of CO2. Let's assume. Now, automobile industry will have many of the various different companies operating. Let's suppose Mahindra and Mahindra is exceeding that, but Maruti Suzuki is over delivering. It is basically emitting lot less. So wherever Mahindra and Mahindra is exceeding the emissions, it can simply trade that with Maruti Suzuki. So companies can also trade, countries can also trade. It is on this basic fundamental where a question was asked in 2023 prelims, which probably we shall be discussing tomorrow. So as many of you, or as much as you think that this year's paper for environment was very random, I still hold the opinion, and that is the opinion, that if you still replay my our prelims discussion of this year immediately after prelims, I still am sternly of the opinion that if you stick to the basic questions and the basic concepts, you had enough questions to be able to clear the prelims comfortably well. If you are able to be aware and revise the basic concept at least 5 to 7 times, right? There is no way that UPSC is going to frame a question where you will have less than 50 basic questions. And 50 basic questions are more than sufficient. To commit 5 errors in that immediately, still you are in the range of close to around 85, 90. And obviously, in the rest of the 50 questions, based on current affairs, etc., you would be able to easily solve 15 more questions, won't you? The problem is that what comes into lot of attention and highlight is the factual questions. Everybody starts talking about what kind of factual question was asked. Factual questions are asked not for everybody to solve. It is a random thing. Even UPSC doesn't expect you to solve the factual questions. But the problem is, while talking about the PYQs, even now when you will be appearing for the prelims test series, many amongst you, and listen to this carefully, it can be you also, many amongst you will be only focusing in the prelims test series to the absolute factual questions, that how come I don't know about this factual question? This is a random question about ocean somewhere that has not been covered. That those factual questions are always a part and parcel of the game. You have to understand it is the basic where you either win or lose. If you are unable to attempt the factual questions, the decision or the result of the prelims are not decided on that. Let me be very certain. A question like which of the animal uses a stick to take out ants from the trees and feed itself, that is orangutan. How many candidates would be aware of that? Very few. Do you think the prelims result is decided on that? Absolutely not. It is decided on these basic questions. If you are able to formulate them, you are through. If you are relying that I will get those factual questions correct, the basic questions I don't know, I will do negative marking, you will never get through. Give 5 attempts, 10 attempts, 50 attempts, you will never be able to get through. Okay? So please have a kind of a mechanism or a strategy developed accordingly. Now, then in 2015, you had the Paris Agreement, which was arrived at. Now, Paris Agreement was different from the Kyoto Protocol because you did not have any such binding targets decided by the convention or the agreement itself. Rather, you had each of the individual countries talking about intended nationally determined contributions. That is INDC. These INDCs were to be declared by each of these countries. And after every 5 years of a stock take, that where you are in terms of achieving the goals that you have set for yourself, after that you have to elevate that level of target for yourself. So in this way, every country tries to keep on outperforming itself, and in that way they can control the amount of emissions that are happening. That was the unique factor of the Paris Agreement. Now, the Paris Agreement provides for the post Kyoto Protocol commitments to combat climate change. Now, the target here or the goal here is that reduce the level of warming to 2 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre industrial levels. But if we are able to overachieve, we will be able to keep the targeted warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre industrial levels. Okay, so that is basically the stretch goal, that in the best scenario we are going to achieve that, but in general we should definitely be adhering to 2 degrees Celsius and less of warming. It calls for the stopping of the rise of greenhouse gases as soon as possible. And the Paris Agreement is actually not a treaty, and the INDCs are not binding. This is relevant for your prelims. But here, the countries have to be open to inspection, right? So countries have to participate in a system for measuring their progress and measuring their goals. It cannot happen that the countries randomly tomorrow China says that, I have half the level of emissions. No, you have to be open to that level of scrutiny also. Implementation of the agreement by all member countries will be evaluated every 5 years. Then, finance will be provided to the poorer nations to help them cut emissions and cope with the effect of extreme weather events, right? Help the poorer countries. It is this concept of helping the poorer countries where the concept of loss and damage fund to help the poorer countries, that came into existence, that came into prominence. It was discussed in the last year's Conference of Parties in Egypt, Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, and this year in the Conference of Parties in UAE, that loss and damage fund has been finalized. Now here, keep warming well below 2 degrees Celsius, continue all efforts to limit the rise of temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Rich countries must provide $100 billion from 2020 as a base, and beyond that, they are free to provide the additional sum. But as has been the case always with the developed nations, they like to promise good, but they underdeliver. So they have not provided that amount of money. And that is one of the major grievance that the developing countries hold, the underdeveloped countries hold, that look, you have to give us money in order to help us adapt to the conditions of climate change. In order to reduce our emissions, we need newer tech. We need that. But the rich countries are not ready to do so. Right. So developed countries must continue to take the lead in the reduction of the greenhouse gases, and developing nations can improve their efforts, increase their efforts, and over a period of time, introduce cuts. Now, here, aim for the greenhouse gas emissions to peak as soon as possible, right? Because in your developmental path, in your developmental journey for any country, be it the Western economies, be it the Asian giants as they are growing,